I am now going to show you how to knit this type of selbu mittens. These are knitted with very thin yarn and very thin needles, and this type is for men. You can see that on the cuff and how that is made. It's not just a ribbing, it's with pattern, and it's a small piece of ribbing in the end. And these were common for the bride to knit for their grooms before the wedding, and they are also excellent gifts for other occasions. And again, you have lots and lots of different patterns to choose from, both for the cuffs and the main piece here. They can also be personalized with letters and year. And on this side of the hand there are also many variations. Here you can see the inside here on the thumb, and this one has another pattern variation. And I've made a series of videos that show step by step how to make the mittens, and here I will show you how to make this type of cuff, but I will also make videos of different types of cuffs for women and children, so that you can make variations yourself, and I will publish patterns on the blog. I begin by taking the yarn I will use for bottom color, and I cast on. And when I cast on for cuffs on mittens and other things that I want to have extra elasticity, first I make a slip knot like this. I find my first knitting needle, and there I have my first stitch. And I will now divide all the stitches I need onto 4 knitting needles. And I begin by holding my knitting needle here in my left hand, and I hold my yarn like this, and then I use my index finger and I move it from down and up, and I twist so I get a loop around my index finger. I place the knitting needle on top of the yarn and I move it down to the tip of my index finger, up through the loop, and I just slip it onto the needle. So up and twist to make the loop, knitting needle on top, going down to the tip of my index finger, through the loop, and slip it onto the knitting needle. And then I just keep going. And the number of stitches you need will of course depend on the pattern you are following, but when you have cast on about 1/4 of the stitches, you find your second knitting needle. You place it underneath the first and just hold the two together like this, and you keep going. Make sure that the first stitch here on your second needle are close to the last one, so that you don't create a big gap there. And then you just keep going until you have cast on all your stitches onto your 4 needles. Now I have cast on all my stitches, and I have organized my needles so that the first and the last needle I cast on, they lie on top of the two others. This makes it easier to begin knitting the cuff. And I will begin to knit a ribbing. I will do I knit 2, purl 1, knit 2 and purl 1. You can do several different variations of that. You can knit 1, purl 1, knit 2, purl 2, knit 3, purl 1, whatever you like, or whatever is stated in the pattern you are following. So when I knit, I take my 5th knitting needle and I stick it through the first stitch from the bottom and up, like this. I move to the tip of my index finger and down behind my yarn to pick it up, and I bring the yarn through the stitch and I just slip it onto my 5th knitting needle here. I make sure I bring the stitch close to the last stitch I cast on here, and then I knit 1 more. I have to go a bit slow on the first row, both because I have quite thin needles and because the way I cast on makes the stitches a bit unstable when they have not been knitted. So I need to knit all the stitches once before they are stable and do not move. I can, as you can see, I can move the stitches and create gaps between them. And this is what makes this cast on so stretchy. So because of that I have to go slow on the first row to make sure I do it even. So when I purl, I begin at the tip of my index finger, I move down underneath my yarn and I stick my needle through the next stitch from down and up as I did before, only now I do it on my far side, and then I move back underneath my yarn and I bring it through the stitch and I slip it onto my next knitting needle. So make sure not to pull this right needle too much, because then you will get a long gap here. If you have done this, it's easy to mend. Just make sure on the next couple of stitches you do not pull at all, and then your gap will be a lot smaller. So I will just continue to knit my ribbing, and then when I am finished with this first row I don't have to be as careful anymore, because then my stitches will be more stable and easier to knit. My yarn I keep over these 2 fingers. There are several different ways of doing that, so just choose the way of doing it that you are comfortable with. Now I am finished with the ribbing, and as you can see it's not much on the men's cuff, it's only 2 or 3 rows with ribbing. And I will now add my pattern color. So when I do, I just place my bottom color over my index finger and my pattern color over my middle finger as well. My yarn end I just twist around my thumb when I begin, so that I am able to put some tension on the pattern color I just added without losing the yarn. So when I knit, I usually want to keep my bottom color closest to me and the pattern color away from me. When I do, the bottom color is the one that will be the most prominent color, and the pattern color will be, those stitches will appear a bit more narrow than the bottom color. And I choose to do it this way because I don't like when it looks like the pattern lies on top. So but this is just a matter of personal taste, and you can do it opposite if you like the pattern to look a bit more bold. The most important thing is that what you begin with, you keep doing. So be consistent, because if you change places when you knit, it will appear uneven and it will not look as good. So no matter what you choose, do the same throughout the whole process. So I will just begin. Now I will not knit any more ribbing, so it will be only knit stitches from now. And I will begin to knit my pattern. And I will do as before. Just when I want my pattern color, I pick up the black yarn instead of the white. So it's not more complicated than that. So I just keep knitting regularly, picking up the color I want for each stitch. And now when I have only, my yarn floats only reach over 2 white stitches, it's not a big deal, but when I have longer yarn floats, I usually try to stretch it once in a while just to make sure I do not pull my yarn floats too tight. So just keep knitting your cuff pattern, and when that is finished, the cuff is also almost finished. Now I have arrived at a place in my pattern where I am going to knit 8 stitches in a row with my bottom color. When I do so, I will get a yarn float with my black yarn that runs over these 8 stitches. I think that is too long and it will be easy to catch a finger in it. So what I'm going to do is that I knit 3 or 4 of the stitches, and then when I want to attach the black yarn, I knit the stitch as normal, but when I pick up the white yarn I go behind the black one, and then I get the white yarn and pull it through here. And now I did it differently than I picked up the yarn differently than I usually do, so I have twisted this stitch on my needle, so I have to twist it back again. And then my next stitch I go from this side again to make sure the bottom color stays close to me. And then I knit the remaining stitches here, and as you can see here I have attached the pattern color. So if I wanted to do it the opposite way, if these were in my pattern color, which I have here the farthest away from me. Then I would go underneath here to pick up the black and then over again on the next. And now I have attached the white yarn. So this is how I avoid the long yarn floats. I'm now almost finished with my cuff, and this row is my last row with the cuff pattern. So the next thing I will do is to knit one row in bottom color, and on that row I will increase with a number of stitches evenly distributed on the row. The reason I do this is to make the mitten a little bit wider and to adjust the stitch number so that it fits the mitten pattern. So I will begin just to knit and when it fits with the pattern I follow, I will make an increase, and to do that I pick up the yarn between two stitches and I put it on the left needle. Then I use my right needle and I stick it through this stitch from the opposite direction, and I make them switch places like this, and then I just knit, and there you can see I have made another stitch. So when I will just knit a couple more, and as you can see my increase can hardly be seen at all. I will do one more just to show you what will happen if I do not twist the stitch the way I did there. If I pick up the yarn and place it on my left needle and just knit it without twisting it, I will get a hole. There you can see it will be a hole in the mitten and it will not look as good. So that is why I stick my right needle through, make the needles switch places and then knit, because then I will twist the stitch I make and close the hole. So of course how many increases you make in this row will depend on the pattern you are following.